Okay, so GEOGRAPHY4A, here's the web page that you might be able to access. You can see where the route is on the web. You can see that you've got used to this as you went through the work. I know Mr. Isaac set this up, and it's a really good way of going through the inquiry process as it relates to 4A. We'll have a look at that in a second. Let's have a little bit of EastEnders. Dun, 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 dun. Blah 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 blah. Okay, so there's our study area. We know that we've been looking at the central area here, and we know that we have a west to east component. But it's worth reminding yourself that one of the key things that happens with GEOG4A is boys, and I presume girls as well, forget to reference actual named places. If you don't know your Beckton Park from your Tower Hill, you're a moron. So make sure from the very beginning that you embed every answer with a sense of place. Look at any of the examiner's reports, or just watch this video again. You're a moron if you do not reference as much as possible acute located detail. For example, if on your transect there was an anomalous value in a particular place, you should be able to say where that place was, and you should be able to explain local conditions that made it an anomalous value. So that's the place. I'm going to close Google Earth because it hoovers bandwidth, and let's have a look at this document. So from this page, which is where you were told to get all your information from, and you can go back to if you want, you walked through, like nice little children, all the stages you need to do to go through the inquiry process. Clearly the exam questions are going to focus on elements from within the inquiry process. So I'm going to talk most about the inquiry process and allude to what that means for London Docklands. Not, I'm going to tell you everything that you knew about the London Docklands and then leave you hanging. You've got to make sure that when you look at this column of information here, from 1 down to probably 90,000 down to 8, each of those is a potential area for a question. And remember, you may only get 5 questions in the whole of GEOGRAPHY4A. So if you're heading for 90%, you cannot be at home to Mr. Cockup. You've got to make sure you understand what they're looking for. So we've got obvious things to do with the inquiry process. Ignore 1, that's post-trip information. I'm not particularly interested in going through that with you. Remember from your GEOG4, from your GEOG2 of your AS, you've got to have 2 things in your mind if the aim idea, if the first question is to do with the setting up of your inquiry, the locational context and the theoretical context. Given that we are in London and that you study world cities, 2 things combine. One of the biggest and now quite well embedded redevelopment projects, which has used all of the great cascade of top-down government clearing up of land right down to Mungo and Jerry with their BMW buying little maisonette and doing it up and somebody else seeing it and they buy it next door, gentrification. All of those processes have helped to give a spread effect, not a distance decay effect, a spread effect of redevelopment across the whole of the area. So we understand the location and remember the temporal line. This happened so long ago that we would have expected by now for that central area around One Canary Wharf to have spread out both west and to east, and that's important when we think about both hypothesis 1 and hypothesis 2, which we'll come on to in a moment. In terms of theoretical context, I've said enough. It's urban cities, it's all about regeneration, all about top-down partnerships, individual, private action, small scale, blah, de-blah, de-blah. So from that we then got our aim of the inquiry, the aim of the inquiry. Now the aim of an inquiry is the broad catch-all. What's the aim? Well, the aim is to investigate the buildings outside this window. The aim is to investigate the success of regeneration. The aim is to investigate regeneration. And there's your aim, to investigate regeneration of London Docklands. Couldn't be more clear, couldn't be more broad. And you'll have to write that up. If you can't write that and you end up writing a single hypothesis, if you write a single hypothesis in that aim section, you are limiting your opportunities later on to quickly make reference to the full inquiry process. Because once you've got a name, you then set up sub-questions. If you're watching in Noddyland, we actually set up hypotheses for testing. And our hypotheses, which sit within the aim, by answering these hypotheses, we will get a very, very good conclusion and evaluation of our aim. Hypothesis 1, there it is in a beautiful kind of browny poo colour. There will be no distance decay effect with environmental quality from One Canary Wharf. Simply put, we are not expecting to see environmental quality change from the centre to the outside of our transects. Nice and straightforward. Well, why might you? Well, of course, environmental quality is proxy data. We'll come on to that in a second. We can't measure actual development. Hypothesis 2, is there a west to east split? Has it been equal from there to there? Because none of you did a transect to the west and a transect to east, and therefore we have to have a hypothesis that looks at the comparative regeneration of both sides, because otherwise you're just going to get half the picture of a distance decay effect. And we know with our study area we've got the city on one side and whatever happens out east of London on the other side. I don't know, but it's a bit of weird out there. Trust me, I once sailed and capsized there. You don't want to do that. It's kind of shark. Anyway, moving on. Hypothesis 3 is a temporal redevelopment idea, and from that you went to the museum and you interviewed a few people. Don't throw out the museum, because it gives you a chance to write about secondary sources of data, much more so than hypothesis 1 or hypothesis 2. So if they go and ask you about the role of primary and secondary data, that's where you might have to start talking about hypothesis 3. Just a simple idea. Once I know my hypothesis, I kind of get an idea of the data I want to gather. Once I've got my data I want to gather, that gives me my data collection idea, and that's the next section. Gathering of primary data, here it is, number 4, and devising a strategy to get it. Any gathering of data must of course include piloting of techniques, risk assessments, and ideas of sampling. If you can't get those 3 things walking into your exam, you are a noddy. Piloting, testing a technique to make sure it's applicable for all the repetitions that will happen across not just your transect but across the group as a whole. So you piloted either at the time by all standing there at Tower Hill and saying, right, what would you give the environmental quality here? That's a 6, that's a 20, that's a 4. Let's all agree that it's a 5. Okay, now we've got an idea what it should be. We'll now use that in the way we look at our own individual sites as we work out through the afternoon. Or you can retrospectively pilot and then alter the scores that were given. It seems like not a wholesome process and a bit of cheat, but actually it's a demonstration that you actually have gone through the process of adjusting whenever you compare 2 transects. If it's just you and just the hypothesis 1, distance decay, the piloting is not so important as long as you are consistent. But you didn't need to pilot across all the groups. But with hypothesis 2, we did need to make sure that one man's 3 is another man's 3. Figure it out, write it up yourself, you understand it, I hope. So, proxy data. We can't measure the quality of regeneration, therefore we're measuring the quality of the environment in the area, because if it's been well regenerated, we would expect to be able to find a high quality in the environment. Proxy data, really good quality marks in there, because you're not just gathering data. It's not like the rivers work where we measured the width of the river. You thought and had to go through another process of intellectualization to be able to get to why the data is that you're going to gather and how you're going to gather it. Sampling, really straightforward. Stratified sampling to designate the actual transects. I can't remember who did it, I think it was Mr. Madden did it. So we make sure we cover our area and we make sure we're avoiding potentially big hazards. Within your individual transect, you then had a systematic sampling, every whatever you did, 100 meters, 100 feet, I care not, but you will remember. And then finally, random sampling, the role of random sampling. Well, you didn't really random sample in hypothesis 1 or 2, so just drop it in for hypothesis 3 with the people you questionnared, okay? If you can make something up, fine, but I'd leave it like that. Gives you a chance to introduce hypothesis 1, 2 and 3 and differentiate between them, which again means that the examiner, bear in mind that most of these examiners are used to marking coursework type things, a written up task. They will see that you actually have knitted the whole thought process together in terms of sampling. But don't, if you get a question on sampling, rest on one methodology. Demonstrate how they all had a role to play and recognize that hierarchy of scale, from the stratified selection of transect right down to interviewing people after lunch, knocking around Canary Wharf Tower. Okay, risk assessment. Enough risk assessment talk. You've got a risk assessment, you're mature enough to understand it, but remember the language. Identification of risk, quantification of potential impact and probability of event occurring, development of mitigation strategy, implementation of mitigation strategy. Now, don't write, there was a problem of people getting lost. Give it some a little polish. There was a concern of interpersonal crime. Because of this, 2 measures were decided upon, and these were carried out having the briefing. They were never to be alone and to make sure our valuables were kept out of sight. Now that might sound a bit noddy, and for you street kids it's just down with the hood, But if it's going to get you marks and get you closer to A star, a land of milk and honey, you better remember it. Fine. Anything else on sampling and risk assessment? No, none. Phones, mobile phones, etc. Again, you've got the pack. Here it is. You've got this pack. It goes through everything for you. Okay, it's superb. The details in there. I'm not going to waste my time going through it. This is just an overview. Okay, so you've gathered your data. Once you've got your data and you're back from Tower Hill, you've got your transect data and you've got 3 hypotheses. Let's ignore hypothesis 3 for a second. I've got hypothesis 1. I've got a transect along which I deliberately took images to upload to a GIS. Okay, overplay the importance of data presentation. And on that GIS, you were able to, using Excel, you were able to plot compound or proportional symbols onto a base map. That's what the GIS allows you to do. From that, you were able to see trends in your data, and because of an agreed congruence of methodology, you could see similarities with other transects. From that, you might have been able to see trends or patterns. You may also have identified anomalies, and because people took geotagged images, you could drill down to the exact location on Google Earth to those places, possibly with a pop-up balloon or with just what the images that they're much better with a pop-up balloon because that was primary evidence taken on the day you were there, and you're able to discount certain anomalous figures. If you want to, you can say we also did a basic scatter graph, and from that it was clear that there was apparently a relationship. That's it. Data presentation, nice and straightforward, because they might ask you the role of data presentation, and I would talk about frame and answer in terms of complexity. Scatter graph is not very complex. Using a 3-dimensional proportionality on a GIS, even if it is Google Earth, it's a GIS, and therefore it's going to bang some heads together, and an examiner's going to have an excuse to give you credit. The path of least resistance for an examiner to give you credit leads to the valley of A star. Moving on. Analysis. Statistics. There are 2 types of statistics, and again you can frame your answer in terms of increasing or decreasing if you want to, but it's easy to go increasing complexity. Descriptive statistics. They are typically where we use a number in replacement for a total data set. So if I was to say what is the average IQ of Paulines in the 8th form, I'd probably get the answer 110. If I then find out that the mean is 110 and the standard deviation is 1, that means the majority of you sit between 111 and 109. So those 2 numbers, the index of centrality, in that case the mean, and the dispersion away from there, they are used to be able to give us a description of the data set itself. Nice and straightforward. Mean, of course, has standard deviation. Median has interquartile range. Mode has nothing, literally. So those are your descriptive statistics. More importantly, of course, when you're being asked about statistics, is the role of something like, in our work anyway, the stats test, Spearman's rank correlation coefficient, and the Mann-Whitney U-test. They allow us to be able to eliminate chance, any other factor that isn't reliable causality, from an explanation from observed correlation. And you've been through enough examples of these to understand, but do not underplay the role of both types of statistics, and with something like Spearman, ensure that you cover the very, very important points. You're eliminating chance. Most of that chance may have come from the sampling process, because that allows you to demonstrate that you know that sampling way back when it was raining in East London, that sampling that you chose to use may in fact have impacted on the significance test that you've done here in Leafy Barnes. Mann-Whitney U-test, remember you're comparing 2 sides, the east and west of our study area, and do they actually represent a similar or congruent data set, or is there a difference in the regeneration on the west to the east? Now you of course know that there probably was, because over to the western side you've got the City of London, established industrial heartland with very, very expensive land, therefore more people are liable to go in there to make money, whereas to the east there isn't that same economic driver to improving regeneration. Therefore we would expect to see that in fact if we compare to western and east transit there would be a difference. I don't know whether you've got it, you have a look. Remember the trick with Mann-Whitney U, we're looking at the lowest U value, and the critical value that you calculate, in other words the U value when you do your significance testing, has to be less than the value that is printed in the tables for you to reject the null hypothesis in favour of an alternative hypothesis. Okay, look that up, go and see one of your teachers, or if you really have to, come and see me and I'll explain it more. So that's the role of stats test. So we're down here, and this is not the most visual of these videos I'll ever do. Once you get into this section down 6, you should have written up all of these things. I won't mention hypothesis 3, but remember hypothesis 1 goes scatter graph, GIS, Spearman's, blah, explanation. Hypothesis 2 goes to calculating the statistic, because you've already created for hypothesis 1, you've already created your wonderful graphs. You're using that for hypothesis 2, where you plug the numbers back in, more calculation, a little bit more complexity in the calculation. Does the west and the east, does it look like they come from the same data set? So that's your null hypothesis. There is no difference between the environmental quality, i.e. regeneration, on the west to the east, and you can only reject that null hypothesis in favour of the view that there is a difference if you can eliminate chance as an explanation for that. Getting towards the end, because I know I'm getting tedious. Conclusions. When drawing conclusions, conclude not just on each of the hypotheses clearly, really clearly, but conclude then over the overall aim. Remember, a conclusion is not an evaluation. The evaluation, the weakness in the evaluation is people say, I don't think this is a very good piece of work because it was raining and I didn't want to measure things because I was scared of a bit of interpersonal crime. Don't please don't please walk into this last question without a framework to your answer. You evaluate everything from the methodology, which is where people spend too much time, the quality and the transference and the scale of the results and the conclusions, and include in your evaluation, what would I do next? How would I develop this? And the best thing you can talk about here is to think temporal or spatial. I would then take my results and I would do it in another city with a similar documentary development, of which, by the way, you'll find them around the world. Water is the one thing that leads to and focuses large urban regeneration. So you've got the Cardiff Bay development, you've got the Birmingham canals, you can go down to the Yarra River in Melbourne if you've got nothing else to do and you're down in Melbourne, and you can also go off to the Sydney side harbour area, dock area, sorry. So that's how you could build up your answer. In essence, this is a very, very straightforward exam. It is only complicated by you not walking in knowing which keywords in the questions should elicit certain blocks of my answer. If you've got any questions, ask your teacher. I'll probably make one of these on the other side of Geography 4A on the video, on the skills and things. But that's it for now. Thank you. Goodbye.